Today we're going to finish up looking at the video we've been watching, Pyramid.
At Hyperbole love to recite the facts. It covers 13 acres, or the equivalent of 7 square blocks of Midtown Manhattan. It contains well over 2 million blocks of stone, some weighing as much as 15 tons. It stretches 755 feet along each of its 4 sides, and is so close to geometric perfection that the difference between the longest and the shortest sides is only 7 inches. And each side is aligned with one of the true directions of the compass. It rises at an angle of 52 degrees to a height of 481 feet, about the size of a 40-story office building. The Great Pyramid of Giza, an eternal monument to one of the towering figures of history. And yet this is the only complete representation we have of its builder and one-time occupant, an ivory figurine barely 3 inches tall. On the east side of the Great Pyramid are 3 smaller ones, which scholars have concluded were probably the tombs of Khufu's 3 main wives. And just beyond, a virtual planned community of mastabas for other family members and court favorites. The sides of the Great Pyramid now look like giant steps, but they used to be smooth, covered with a casing of polished limestone, like the casing stones on top of the other huge pyramid here at Giza. That one is only slightly smaller than Khufu's, but it's built on higher ground, which makes it appear just as large. We can see quite clearly here at its base how surface rock was neatly chiseled out of the surrounding limestone bed during the leveling process. The stone was then used for core blocks. In fact, all of the inner stones for the pyramids were quarried as close to the work site as possible. The only exception was the fine limestone used in the casing. It had to be transported from Tura across the river. They're currently restoring the outer casing of the step pyramid at Saqqara with white Tura limestone, which will give us a sense of what a finished pyramid must have looked like. Tura limestone is relatively soft and was easily quarried with the simple tools and techniques the ancient Egyptians had to work with. They chiseled slots into the stone, stuck wooden wedges into them, soaked the wedges with water, then waited for the wedges to swell and break the stone free. Quarrymen also used stone hammers, metal chisels, wooden mallets, copper saws, drills, and finely ground quartz sand. They dragged the stone to the work site with rope and wooden sledges. It's questionable whether the Egyptian builders ever knew of construction machines more elaborate than the large sledges hauled by gangs of laborers, or the smaller wooden rockers used to move the stones around once they were up here. There is evidence that they tried using animals and other construction aids, but they apparently decided that simple manpower was the best way of all. No pulleys were used to raise the heavy blocks. They were simply dragged up ramps of mud, brick, and earth. And once they reached the appropriate level, they were levered into place, but not before the masons had cut them with incredible precision. Even the large granite casing stones like these on the 3rd pyramid of Giza fit so tightly together that you can't slip a piece of paper between them. The hauling was done by gangs of conscripted peasants, most of whom probably worked seasonally, a few months stretch after the harvest and during the inundation. But they were not slaves. They were paid with food and clothing. And once their annual work for the state was completed, they returned home to their fields of wheat and barley, either a little worse for wear or in great shape. Take your pick. Of all the debates over pyramid construction, probably the most spirited is the one over the type of ramp system used. Some people believe a single ramp was built from the local quarry to the top of the pyramid. Others maintain that 4 smaller ramps spiraled around the sides of the pyramid, each beginning at one of the 4 corners. There's yet another theory that seems to combine the previous 2. Though the debate continues, it's encouraging that the issue has settled on ideas about building techniques, rather than on preposterous and demeaning notions of astral visitation and black magic and so on. As it turns out, ancient civilizations did possess the technical skills, the determination, and the imagination to build such structures. and without the help of alien astronauts and supernatural forces.
It was the event we had eagerly awaited for so many years.
The capstone has arrived, Your Majesty.
A magnificent, smoothly carved block of limestone, sheathed in gold.
At the top of the final course, we have chiseled a slot into which the capstone will be secured. As the mud brick ramps are removed, a scaffolding is erected so the workers can chisel away the steps of the casing, leaving the entire surface smooth. As they complete their task, others polish it to brilliance.
With that, my father's Great Pyramid was complete.
And just in time.
The falcon has flown to the sky to become one with the sun god Re. Like his fathers before him, he has become Osiris.
My father was taken to his valley temple for the 70 days of embalming which would prepare him for his life in the hereafter. His internal organs were placed in jars of limestone. His body was prepared with natron, then anointed with myrrh, cedar oil, honey, and olive oil. Incense was burned. When the embalming was completed, he was wrapped in strips of fine linen, upon which his own features were painted to assure that his body could be recognized by his car. The burial chamber was furnished with everything my father's car would need to live there for eternity. From the valley temple, my father's body was taken up the sacred causeway to his pyramid temple, and here his mouth was opened by the high priest, allowing him to partake in the offerings that would keep him alive forever. And here he was awakened to his everlasting life as Osiris. As my brother, Jedefra, became the falcon, Horus, king of this life. At this moment, my mind traveled back to the words my father had said for his father, Sneferu, as the dead king was placed in his pyramid.
Hail, Deep, ladder of the god, arise, remove your earth, raise yourself that you may travel in company with spirits, for your wings are those of a falcon. Cross the sky and make your abode among the followers of Osiris, the imperishable stars.
And deep within the pyramid, inside a case of granite, my father's body was placed to rest, to watch over us, over all Egypt, his people, safe and protected for all time to come.
Monsieur le Courrier, voici.
Qu'est-ce que c'est?
Je pense que je l'ai trouvé.
Que voyez-vous?
No, they didn't find anything in here. The archaeologists who accompanied Napoleon in 1798, or the Italian chaplain André Fabet, who entered the Great Pyramid in 1549, or the French explorer Pierre Bellon, who did so 2 years before that, or the Muslim caliph who sent his diggers all through the pyramid looking for the legendary treasures of the pharaohs, all came out empty-handed. Of all the tantalizing mysteries associated with the Great Pyramid, the failure to uncover any substantial evidence of its builder is perhaps the greatest mystery of all. We know this was Khufu's pyramid primarily because workmen painted the king's name in the ceiling structure of the burial chamber. The pyramid temple, which would have clearly established the name of the monarch, was totally destroyed. One of the many mysteries of the Great Pyramid is this incredible grand gallery deep in the heart of the pyramid, which leads up to the burial chamber. Our story offers a possible explanation. No other pyramid contains a burial chamber so high up in the structure itself, and no other has such an impressive way of getting there. We have the pyramid itself and nothing else. A situation the tomb explorers found over and over again. Which is what makes this particular tomb in the Valley of the Kings so extraordinary. This is the tomb of King Tutankhamun, monarch of the New Kingdom's 18th dynasty, who probably died before the age of 21. Though he might have had a relatively small impact while alive, his significance in death was enormous. Of all the tombs of the Egyptian kings, Tutankhamun's was the only one to survive intact. And that was only because it was completely covered by rubble and debris from a later, larger tomb. It was discovered in 1921 by the English archaeologist Howard Carter, working under the backing of his patron, Lord Carnarvon. The treasures they found in just these few small underground rooms take up an entire wing of the Egyptian Museum. The mummy itself remains here in the burial chamber, its eternal home, in one of its 3 golden coffins. The Valley of the Kings became the final resting place of Egyptian monarchs following the decline of the pyramids. We don't know for sure why they stopped building pyramids. Probably their tremendous cost and their inability to keep out tomb robbers had a lot to do with it. But even here, it's clear that the old shape remained sacred. High above the Valley of the Kings, a natural pyramid formation etches the sky. It wasn't an abrupt transition from the pyramids of Giza to the valleys near Luxor. While it all may be ancient Egypt to most of us, 15 centuries separate Khufu and Tutankhamun. And for a good deal longer than that, very little was known about this fascinating culture. One reason being that much of its remains were covered over by the desert sands. The second reason little was known or understood about ancient Egyptian civilization is that it had no way of communicating its secrets with us. Hieroglyphic writing was nothing more than a series of interesting but obscure pictures. Well, that all changed in 1799 with that same Napoleonic expedition that entered the Great Pyramid. This is a replica of a chunk of black basalt unearthed by one of Napoleon's soldiers in the delta town of Rosetta. It is inscribed in 3 alphabets: Ancient Greek, Demotic, a script used in Egypt at the time of the Greeks, and the even older hieroglyphics. For more than a decade, many people tried to match up the words among the 3 texts, but with little success. Then in 1822, a Frenchman named Jean-François Champollion cracked the puzzle, and the language of the ancients came alive. The most important clue came in the matching up of royal names, which are spelled out phonetically in the hieroglyphics. The royal names are encircled by oblong rings known as cartouches. Here, for instance, is the name Ptolemy, in hieroglyphic, Demotic, and Greek. All the gold of Tutankhamun almost pales in comparison to the value of this intellectual discovery. One of the reasons we have such a rich legacy of artifacts and information, much of it about everyday life, is that so much of it was included in the tombs for use in the next world. This was one society that clearly believed you could take it with you. Here, a wealthy cattle dealer wanted to take his business with him, and so he did, in the form of this model. He even has several accountants there to make sure he isn't being shortchanged. Another person took his grain business with him. And another was evidently fond of sailing. While someone else had more use for heavy manpower. And keep in mind, these weren't merely representations or reminders to the ancient Egyptian. Models, wall paintings, even writings had the same practical and effective value in the afterlife as the real objects also taken along. So So we have some answers to what this civilization of so long ago was actually like. And the search for more of them continues, as it has in earnest now for almost 200 years. Like Howard Carter and Jean-Francois Champollion, modern archaeologists and scholars from Egypt and around the world are still searching for clues to those elusive mysteries, which may lie just below the surface of the desert sand, or may remain as inscrutable as the Great Sphinx, the protector of so many tantalizing secrets over the ages. The Sphinx is part of the second pyramid complex here at Giza, which, despite the way things were going in our story, does not belong to Djedefre. He is thought to have been entombed about 5 miles to the north at Abu Rawash. Almost nothing of his pyramid remains, and it is doubtful it could have been completed in the scant 4 years of his unremarkable reign. It took a far stronger, more powerful, and long-lived monarch to build the second of these 3 mammoth structures, to inspire, challenge, and fascinate forever.
Mother, will I become Horus one day too?
I do not think so, Khafra. Your brother Karok is first in line to be king, but I am sure your future will also be great.
Yes, I think it will be.
One will rule a brief time only. He will be reviled in his own time, and defamed when he is gone. The other will be strong and brave. He will rule for many years, and Egypt will grow even greater under him. He will do you honor and guard your sacred house of eternity. And his proud face will be known until the end of time.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Learned some things from it. Well, let's get back into our notes, and we'll go into the next period of Egyptian history, leave Old Kingdom period, and go into the first intermediate. Before we do that, or as you're preparing to find out your notes, let's talk about the most important parts of the Old Kingdom. When you think of Old Kingdom period, what's the first thing you think of? Maybe what we just looked at, pyramid, right? Okay, so make sure you associate that. The pyramids with the Old Kingdom period. What else, what other great structure was built during the Old Kingdom? Right, the Great Sphinx. So remember, those are two of the really important things to remember about the Old Kingdom period. At the end of the Old Kingdom period, things began to break apart in Egypt, and so we enter into the first intermediate period. This was a time of civil war, as 2 cities competed for power. The city of Heracleopolis, whoops, not up there. I had a slide there for you. Here. The city right here, and the city of Thebes. These 2 cities were trying to gain power over Egypt, and that created civil war.
There are Thebes in Greece. Oh wait, I think that
Not that I can remember.
I think.
So these 2 cities are creating a civil conflict within Egypt, so that means that the power of Egypt is declining during this period. Because of that, there were some people that came in from Asia, not sure exactly who they were, but from the east of Egypt, came and settled up in the Delta area. So they don't have enough power to even keep other people from coming into their land. If you look at the literature written at this time period, there's a lot of pessimism. People just don't have much hope for anything. Things aren't going well in Egypt at all. And so there's been a move from the centralized government of Pharaoh and breaking down into separate governments of different cities, and especially then these two cities trying to gain control. One positive thing you might say for the common people during this period is that prior to this, life after death was reserved only for Pharaoh and the royalty. During this time period, they began to see that as broadening out into other people. So all people eventually were considered to have life after death. Thebes was eventually victorious, which then brings Egypt back on the road to being a unified nation once again. Oops, I forgot to put this slide up for you. Sorry. Here's the information I just was telling you. I just came across some information recently that may indicate that Joseph and his family came into Egypt at the end of this intermediate period. Primarily, it looks like, most of the evidence looks like it was during the Middle Kingdom period, but I have to do some more research on that because there seems to be some conflicting information. But at any rate, either during the first intermediate or as we go into the Middle Kingdom period is what we call our patriarchal period in the book of Genesis. And so we definitely have Abraham coming before this time. And then, of course, Isaac has Jacob. Jacob and his sons then become the dominant feature that we find as we move from intermediate to the Middle Kingdom, and especially as we look at the life of Joseph in Egypt. So as we come into the Middle Kingdom, it's considered to be the 10th and 12th dynasties. The information I have concerning Jacob and the family of Joseph being in Egypt is during the 10th dynasty. So, like I said, I'll have to do some more research on that to see exactly when they may have come into Egypt. During this Middle Kingdom period, centralized government comes back. So once again, there is one authority, the authority of Pharaoh in Egypt. It's a unified nation once again. But they develop what might be called a feudal state. I don't know if you remember studying feudalism in the Middle Ages in Europe, but that simply means that there are lords that own land, and they then farm out that land to people who live on the land and are not exactly slaves, but they are required to produce food for the landowner, and becomes kind of a static society. The Pharaoh becomes powerful once again, and as a part of this Middle Kingdom, we have developed a social pyramid. That is, society is divided up into classes which look like a pyramid. So at the very top of society, we have the Pharaoh. And then below him, we have a number of priests and nobles, and then the merchants. And as we go down the pyramid, there's a larger and larger group. And so then we have the large group of common people. The largest group of all are foreign slaves at the bottom of the social pyramid. This is not unlike any feudal society or any society with a king. Here's a picture in a book that shows the social pyramid with the pharaoh here and the royalty here and merchants. And finally get down to the slaves down here. So the steps on down. That's pyramid picture for you. All right, during this Middle Kingdom period, the centralized authority, as I said, was restored, and civilization began to flourish. They became much more prosperous than they had been. Bureaucracy positions that had previously been given to relatives now were given to the most talented. So government was functioning well because the people that are the best able to do it were doing it, not just any person that was appointed. During this time period, we had the mining industry flourishing as well as agricultural programs. So they found precious metals and were mining. Agriculture was doing well. So it's a time of economic prosperity in this Middle Kingdom period. It's interesting to see what we have from the evidence of what caused the death of people during this period, which we have. The cause of death first was schistosomiasis. You all heard of that? Schistosomiasis? No, I didn't think so. This is the only illustration I could find of it, and it's in German. But what happens is this. The person who has it, pees in the water, and this fluke that he has in his system goes into water. It lives in a snail. Eventually it grows and comes out, and someone sitting in the water, this fluke goes up inside them and lives inside them, and it develops in their intestines and eventually could kill them or not. This guy might pee into the water and pee it back, the fluke back in the water again. So it's a cycle, but it's a cycle that kills people. The next one is scarred lung disease. How would they get scarred lungs, do you suppose? So they had respiratory problems that caused their death. Why would you get scarred lungs?
Maybe they smoked something.
They smoked? That would cause it today, but no, they didn't smoke.
They were breathing in sand.
Breathing in sand. Remember I told you about how much sand there is in Egypt, and it covers the city of Cairo even? Well, they're breathing this in all the time, and that causes lung damage. In our country today, we have people that maybe worked in coal mines, and they have lung damage from that, or work in factories. Sometimes whatever's in the air causes lung damage. Well, they died from lung damage from sand. Another cause of death was severe tooth wear. People died from their teeth wearing out. Now, what would cause their teeth to wear out in that land?
Not brushing it.
Not brushing? Well, I'm not sure if they brushed or not, but most other countries didn't brush either, and the Egyptians were more conscious of hygiene than any other culture at the time, certainly.
The sand got in their mouth and it rubbed away.
Yeah, it's sand once again. Sand in their mouth or in their food even. There's so much sand, you're eating food, there's sand in the food as well. Or you lay your sandwich down and you pick it up and it's got sand on it. That's probably happened to you at the beach, right? You go to a picnic or whatever, you find you're eating sand. So that wore down their teeth and caused infections. Now, how many of you ever gone to the dentist because you had an infected tooth or a painful tooth? None of you ever had a painful tooth? Only two people. Well, we can fix that today. But back then they didn't. And we'll talk much later on about a pharaoh who died from an abscessed tooth. It killed him. The infection of the tooth killed him. All right, so those are some interesting thoughts on what caused death in the Middle Kingdom period of Egypt. Now, either just prior to this period or in this period of time, we have the arrival of Joseph into Egypt. I hope you're familiar with the events that took place in his life. He was sold by his jealous brothers into slavery, and they took him down to Egypt, where he became a domestic slave in the house of Potiphar, where Potiphar's wife falsely accused him of wanting to sleep with her, when in reality she was the one that was the aggressor, and so he was falsely imprisoned. There in prison, he rose to a place of prominence, of responsibility. Through the interpretation of dreams, he was released and made vizier. Remember we talked about the vizier before. Joseph is made the vizier of Egypt. He is the second in command. He's ruling for the pharaohs. And then, of course, we see Jacob's family arrives in Egypt as well. So let's back up just a little bit and show you some of the details here. This is Joseph and his brothers. Here is he's traveling from Hebron, or Mamre, where Jacob lived, and he sends Joseph out to look for his brothers. And so he goes all the way up here looking for his brothers to see what's going on. By the way, what kind of a coat does Joseph have?
Rainbow.
Rainbow coat. We usually picture, and we're told it's a many-colored coat that Jacob gave him because he was the favorite. Let me suggest something to you, and that is the Hebrew word that's translated many-colored, I think would be better translated long sleeve. What would a long sleeve coat mean? If you were out working in the fields,
You wouldn't get as dirty.
it wouldn't be intended to get as dirty.
Protection from the sun.
Well, it might be that, but this is the cultural situation. If you're out working in the fields, would you be wearing a coat? No, you get too hot, right? And you get dirty. So a person who has long sleeves is,
You won't work in the fields.
he's not the worker, he's the supervisor. So like if you go into a factory, you see some guys that are wearing blue shirts. That's usually the common garb for the workers. But who are the guys with the white shirts? They're the foremen, they're the supervisors. Why did Joseph have a long sleeve coat? Jacob appointed him supervisor. That's why he sends them off to look for his brothers. It wasn't little Joseph wandering around, I wonder where my brothers are. Because he's the supervisor. He's out there seeing what's going on. And that's why one of the reasons why they don't like him. Because he's younger than they are. And he's their supervisor. You see how that fits in? All right, so they decide to kill him. They think better of it, and they sell him into slavery with a passing Ishmaelite caravan, and they take him down to Egypt. During a famine that threatens to wipe them out, Jacob and his family then come down to Egypt, and that's a little ahead of the story, but Joseph is in charge, and they end up living there. You can see where the pyramids are in relationship. This is the delta. The land of Goshen is the area encircled. All right, so here it is looking at a topographical map, and you can see going right along the coast, down into, past the delta, down to Egypt where Potiphar lived, and Pharaoh. All right, so you know what happened. Let me give you some historical background that have been found that helps us here. According to some information that I've come across recently, it is a king in the 10th dynasty that had regained control of the delta. Remember I said some Asians had moved in there? He drove them out. And this information says that it was this Pharaoh, who is Akhtoi IV, who was the Pharaoh who ruled Lower Egypt when Joseph arrived in the land as a prisoner of the Midianites. This Akhtoi IV wrote a list of instructions for his son, who would be the next king. And after he gives him a lot of different wise instruction, he then tells his son how he pacified the delta region of Egypt and created a special district which he filled with special people. That could be talking about the family of Jacob, the special people that came in, because they did come and live there. Eventually, we know that as Joseph was in prison, he was treated severely in prison. Psalm 105 points out that they hurt his feet with fetters, he was laid in irons until the time that his word came to pass. Well, you know that while he was in prison, eventually the guy who was in charge of the prison recognized something about Joseph and put him in charge of the prisoners in a position of trust. he became an administrator, and after around 11 years or so in prison, you know how he interpreted the dreams of the chief of the cupbearers and the chief of the bakers, and told the cupbearer that his dream meant that he was going to be restored to his position in 3 days in Pharaoh's house, and he told the baker that he was going to be put to death in 3 days. And those things both happened on Pharaoh's birthday, by the way. So 11 years had passed, and the cupbearer was supposed to get Joseph out of jail, but he forgot about it. So 2 years later, Pharaoh has a couple of dreams that none of the magicians can interpret, and so the cupbearer told Pharaoh about Joseph. You know, Joseph got out. According to Egyptian custom, Joseph would have been shaved. You know, the Jewish people had beards. Everybody had beards, but not Egyptians. They always shaved and they put on clean clothes. Probably bathed them really well. And he interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh, but didn't take credit himself. He gave credit to God for telling him what they meant. But Joseph explained that there was going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine, and that Pharaoh needed to be prepared for that. And so Pharaoh, in his wisdom, realized that the guy to take care of all that was the one standing in front of him. And so he appointed Joseph as his vizier to handle all of this, and in fact gave him his signet ring, fine linen garments, and a necklace of gold. And these kinds of things are given to us in the Egyptian records, and that there are several Canaanites that are mentioned as having had high positions in Egypt. And Joseph's change in name to Zephanath Paneah is something that is mentioned. There are several different people with that name. Joseph was also given the daughter of a priest as his wife. Joseph then toured the country of Egypt and prepared to administer what had to be done. His wife bore him 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Joseph was not only second in power to none but Pharaoh, but in view of the approaching famine, he was placed in control of all grain and granaries. So he combined 2 offices, the office of prime minister and the office of superintendent of the granaries. So Joseph had a lot of power in Egypt. As I said, second only to Pharaoh. Because the real wealth of the nation was grain, that was an important position. In fact, we find thousands of years later, as we come to the Roman Empire, that they are importing grain still from Egypt. Egypt produced a lot of grain. Well, as you know, Joseph is preparing for the famine, and this is what he does. He builds storehouses. Now, something I never heard before until I went to Egypt is that they know where those were. I never knew that this was in existence. Here is where the storehouses were built. I'll show you a better picture here. But this is a pyramid built at those storehouses in a place called Fayum. Now we'll have to continue talking about it tomorrow.